Hi, this is Phil, and it's a cold, rainy day here in Virginia, and I want to talk about something that comes up all the time for backpackers, and that's rain. Rain on the trail, getting wet, or more specifically, how to minimize your misery. I have something I call rain management instead of staying dry. So follow along with me and let me share my experience. They say that wisdom is created by experience, and experience is created from mistakes. Sometimes when I'm looking back at the photos and recalling my trips, I feel pretty lucky to be alive. I think backpacking at my age and continually backpacking probably indicates some sort of mental situation, but that's another story. Any backpacker who has backpacked for any length of time is sooner or later going to get stuck in a rain. A little rain is not too bad, but an all day rain, a torrential downpour can really suck and ruin your trip. So here is the philosophy that I share with folks on the trail. One of the first things you're going to do is you're not going to be able to carry a set of dry clothes for every day. Let's say typically you're a weekend hike, say Friday night, Saturday night, hike out Sunday. You're not real concerned with getting drenched because you'll be back at the car. But once you venture out for about a week or so, then you've really got to start coming up with some kind of plan or philosophy. The thru hikers on the AT or the PCT or the CDT, they're not carrying 5 sets of clothes. What they're carrying is they're walking in one set of clothes and have one set of clothes in the pack that stays dry. So what happens is you're going to get wet, and we're going to talk about how to minimize getting wet and taking care of yourself. You wind up at camp, you're wet. What I tell people to do, or what I advise, or based upon my experience, what I share, what I recommend, is that you set up your tent in case it rains, starts raining again while you're in camp. Set up your tent, go get water as the next thing you do, filter your water, come back in case it rains again and it winds up being an all night, all day rain, and you've got to eat under your vestibule. So you want to have your tent up, get some water, first things first. But you get into your tent, let's say you're soaking wet. You want to change out of your one set of wet clothes and put on that one set of dry clothes. Now, what are those set of dry clothes? Is it another pair of pants, another hiking shirt, leggings, whatever? Probably not. In my case, when I change out of my hiking pants and hiking shirt, let's say they're soaking wet, it'll probably be a pair of nylon shorts and my sweater, or if it's colder, my thermal bottoms and a sweater, and that's about it. So I'm not carrying a second shirt and a second pair of pants. What's going to happen though, you wake up in the next morning and you got to get going. You got to put on the wet stuff. There's no two ways about it. And in theory, you're going to hike it dry. Yeah, I know that's really, really tough for a lot of people to get that concept, to put on the wet stuff and hike it dry. And you might have assumed here that I'm talking about warm weather backpacking, and I am, because we're going to talk about shoulder season backpacking and getting wet in a second here. But the theory is you're going to put on your wet stuff, you're going to walk it dry, or at least walk it till you're warm again. You've warmed up. there's a lot of moving pieces with this. Let's backtrack now to you're hiking down the trail and it starts to rain. Summertime. You're sweating already. You got your pack on. It starts raining. You got to decide what do I want to do? Do I want to keep dry or put on a raincoat? And people immediately jump to the conclusion that a Gore-Tex is going to save them. They put that on. They're going to keep dry. It's not. You're still going to sweat and get the inside of your Gore-Tex wet. And people just don't understand that. Then they're going to get soaking wet. And now you got your shirt all wet. And now you're burning up because you have your coat on. If it's warm enough, you're just going to have to get wet. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is where we get into rain management. Now you're concerned with just not getting hypothermia. You want to stay warm. Now, if you start getting really cold, say you got a wind going, you're on a mountain ridge, you may have to put on a parka, your rain jacket, and hike in that. But you're not doing it to stay dry because you're going to sweat it out. You're hiking in it for your hypothermia, so you don't get hypothermia. This is what I do. If it starts raining and I'm hiking, let's say I'm up in, let's say 10,000 feet, it's 50 degrees. It's going to be pretty miserable. You're going to get wet. Put on your rain jacket. See if you want to balance out your sweat versus the temperature. So you may have to slow down a little bit so you're not pumping up too much heat and really soaking and overheating. You may have to just take off your rain jacket and just get wet if you're not too cold. Maybe you put on a light sweater or something, but you really want to keep that sweater dry for at camp inside your tent. But you've got to reach a balance between staying warm and not getting cold. And I gave up carrying a Gore-Tex jacket 20 years ago. Why? Because they just kept getting completely soaking wet. What I do now is I carry a North Face rain jacket, which is not breathable, and I put that on. I use it as a windbreaker, and I use it for rain and like a freezing rain where I have a sweater on and the parka keep my sweater dry, but it's cold enough where I'm not sweating out my sweater. And so my rain jacket is basically a windbreaker and a rain coat for keeping me warm, not keeping me dry. You've got to reach a balance where your perspiration is not going to soak you while you're walking in a cold rain, because you just want to stay warm and comfortable, but you don't want to get all your layers wet for when you get to camp. You've got to switch out of all that wet stuff, and then you're in your tent, and you want to be warm and dry in your tent. Your tent is your refuge from the storm once you get there. I don't know. It gets complicated, but it's not really complicated. You're hiking, it starts to rain, you have to make a decision. Am I going to get super cold? If not, just let your shirt get wet, and your pants. You get to camp, set up your tent, get water, get inside your tent, take off your wet stuff, hopefully your vestibule. This is the trick, getting inside your tent when you're soaking wet and not getting the floor of your tent all super wet. Change out of your wet clothes, put on your one set of dry, whatever it is. Like I said, in my case, it's a pair of nylon shorts and a nylon t-shirt, or a thermals bottoms and some sort of insulated shirt that I'm carrying. The next morning, you have to get up, take off the warm, dry stuff, put back on the wet stuff, hike it warm. Ideally, you'll hike it dry, but at least after maybe half an hour, because you're backpacking in the summertime, you're going to hike it warm, and that doesn't matter because you're fine. And if it's raining, all right, the stuff's already wet. You're just concentrating on keeping your body safe and warm, and worrying about not getting hypothermia. Has that ever happened to me where I've had to hike in the rain and my stuff got soaking wet? Yeah, unfortunately, it happens all the time. However, I hate walking in the rain. I don't even go on a trip if it's now over 50% chance of rain because it's just miserable, I just don't like it at all. I mean, if you don't have any goals, like you're trying to reach Katahdin or something, you got to drive on, you're focused. But if you're out for a weekend pleasure hike, there's nothing pleasurable about hiking in the rain. So many times I got caught in a downpour where the weather forecasts were iffy. Two stories. One, I was taking my two sons, 11 and 12 years old, on a through hike of Great Smoky Mountains National Park from end to end on the Appalachian Trail and staying in shelters. I've done that 3 times. This was a long time ago. And we had to hike in the rain for about 3 or 4 days. And bless their hearts, they got wet. We got to the shelter, put on some sweaters like this, put on their sweatpants, take the wet clothes, hang them up. Next morning, real troopers. This is in July, pretty warm, but we're about 5,000 feet. So not that warm. Put back on the cold stuff, hike it warm, hike it dry, get to the shelter. Maybe it'll rain, clothes damp, still damp, change, put back on the dry stuff, and the next morning put back on the wet stuff, rinse and repeat until the weather breaks. Real troopers. Second kind of a war story that funny now looking back at it. I was on the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, on the high point of the trail in Virginia, about 5,000 feet at Mount Rogers National Recreation Area by Grayson Highlands State Park. And it was in May, the end of May, and it's still really cold, cold snaps. And we got caught in the rain about noon, and we had to hike for about an hour, set up the tents in the rain. 3 or 4 of us put up our tents, and some of us hiked onto the Thomas Knob shelter, which was overcrowded, and everybody had to sleep sitting up. Soaking wet. My friends, married couple, set up their tent right next to mine, totally soaking wet, even though they were wearing rain gear. And the next morning we woke up and there was frost and ice on all the trees. And this is the last week in May, over the Memorial Day weekend. And ice kind of falling on the tents. And my friend said, well, what do we do? And I said, well, you got to put on your wet clothes, which were in their vestibule and just about frozen. I said, we don't have a choice. You can't get all your stuff wet. We were going to hike for about 5 more days. And no, I'm not going to do it. And their wife got a big shouting match. She said, you got to do it. You got to do it. So I finally put it on. It was about half an hour, 45 minutes before we hiked it warm. But once it was warm, and we were good. And actually the sun came out and dried us all out by the time we got to the next shelter. Funny story. Wasn't too funny at the time, but just another thing that happens on the trail in the rain. Got more war stories about the same thing happening in Wyoming. War stories about on the John Muir Trail rain. Fortunately, out in California, I've never been caught in a giant all-day rain. Knock on wood. Well, that about wraps up this little info brief on rain management versus staying dry. I plan on doing one really soon on a compass. People keep saying you need a map and a compass. It's been my experience that a lot of people carry a map and a compass, but they really don't read a map very well because they've never had training and not familiar with contour lines, contour intervals, and really are not sure how the compass comes into play on using the map. So look for that in the near future. Until then, This is Phil saying, I hope to see you on the trail.